why is that going to matter to them? What is it that they're doing that they have to bring you in because you're going to facilitate their mission and their vision for the world and vice versa? So putting it all together now, Michael, how to build a strategic list. We talk about this idea of 3 buckets: foundation, targets, and reaches. We'd love to kind of hear you talk about these.
I think there are a lot of students, who, they want to feel love. So they kind of feel like they should apply to a large group of what we call foundation. Some people use the word term safety. I like foundation because the word foundation means it's the foundation of your list. You build up upon that list. As a foundation, you've got a couple schools that you feel very confident you're going to get into. And they should be important, but they need to be schools that you really see the fit, that you feel that you're comfortable with, that you would love to go to if things don't work out as well in the target and the reach schools. And again, I think, like I say, lots of times we talk about 10 schools, 12 schools, what's the important number to think about? I wouldn't load up in foundation schools. You find 1 or 2 you really love and you really like to go to. You don't need a whole bunch of others just because it might help your ego that you got more admits.
Right. Michael, can you talk about the 4-4-4 sort of theme and your thoughts on it?
Yeah, a lot of people think that's the good way to go. 4 in the foundation, 4 in the target, 4 in the reach, for 12 schools. I still think, like we just said, I think you can shift 1 or 2 of those over into target or to reach if you've got a couple foundation schools you really like. If you don't, if you need more foundation schools because you're just not sure, that's one thing. And we also talked about, and I don't know if it's in a later slide, but also a student who might need financial aid might need to look at their list a little bit differently. And if financial aid is important, they might need an extra foundation or target school that does merit scholarships, because that's going to be important when they see what their financial aid packages look like. To move on to targets, I think one of the misconceptions at times about targets, and we've talked about this in previous sessions, is you can't take your targets and you can't take your foundations for granted.
Absolutely.
They want to know that you're really serious about them, that you've shown love, that you've shown interest. We've covered a couple topics on how to do that in previous sessions, but I think that's really critical in it because a target can become a reach if you don't treat it right. And so I think that's important. But a target school is one where, as you just said a second ago, your grades, your scores, they fit the parameters of what that school normally looks for. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Cool. And then just to sort of add to that, I have this in the slide, right? Find at least 4 schools where grades and scores fit the medians. And I often find it helpful for students to think about sort of where they are as far as a numerical fit, if you will, looking at some of the U.S. News and World Report data, some of it, right? And I'm going to demonstrate it in a second. Now, obviously, anything on U.S. News and World Report must be taken with a grain of salt, but it can give you some sense as to kind of, where you might be in the applicant pool. And so
the one caution I will make, Chris, on that too is families sometimes will look at the medians and they see them falling on the lower part of it. And they say, oh, we're okay with that school. Realize that the median, if you're on the higher level of the median, you're going to be in much better shape in terms of applying to that particular school. I'll use the example of Vanderbilt, where I went down there and visited a couple of years ago. And you go on, U.S. News and World Report, and you see this median for 25 to 75, and you're looking at 1,200 to 1,400. Well, you better be closer to 1,400 than 1,200 when they're going to start to look at you.
Yeah, and so hopefully you can see it. I brought up 3 schools here in U.S. News and World Report. I got UC Berkeley, which is a public university, right? University of Southern California, which even though it's in California, it's unlike UCB, it's actually a private university. Mm-hmm. And then I also have the beloved Georgetown University here, and I want to highlight the test score medians, right? And now I am assuming that you've got great grades. Because frankly, if you go into all these different schools and you drill down on their data, they're going to say that the average student has like a 4.0, right? So assuming that you've got like, A's, A pluses, whatever or an IB of like anywhere from like a 30 probably into the 40s. Or if you're a UK student, you've got predictions of all A's or A stars. You can look at the test scores to give you a sense as to kind of where you fall. So like, for example, let's just take a student who's test score is I don't know, let's just say it's a 30 for right now, okay? Usually, the closer your score is to either extreme helps you understand kind of where you're at, all right? So like, for example, if you're a student who has a 30 and you're right in the middle of the UCB sort of range, their average is really like a 31. So this is kind of like maybe in the Targetsville, probably Foundationville, okay? USC to 30, I mean, you're going to be a little less competitive there, all right? So this is going to be more of a reach for you, probably, okay? And Georgetown for sure is going to be a reach because you're outside of the lower band. However, if you're like Michael's students, who he was talking to the other day, who had 35s and 36s, you're above the 75th percentile for each of these score ranges, right? So you're probably, I mean, look, it's kind of hard to say that any school of this caliber is like a foundation or a target school, but you can feel much better about your chances at a UCB or a USC or a Georgetown with a 35 or a 36. So
let me add one big thing to that too, and using Berkeley as the example. There's a danger when you look at Michigan, Virginia, UNC, and Berkeley, public schools, because the lower part of their range is impacted by the fact that they have to take significant numbers of students from in-state, okay? Yep. Unfortunately, these schools don't post what the range is for their out-of-state applicants, which would be significantly higher.
If you're someone who's coming from out of state, and you're applying to a UCLA or UCB, you have to basically be, especially at Berkeley in particular, you have to be an Ivy League caliber candidate to be admitted. And then it's finally on this is that, yes, University of California university system has gotten rid of testing. So just again, use what we're doing, what we're showing here just to be as a point of illustration. It's not really about UC Berkeley specifically, but schools where they haven't got rid of testing, forever, like they have at UCs. Yep. All right, cool. So then here, let me go back over then to our slides. Right. So back up over here on the targets, again, that's what I'm talking about in terms of medians, right? So if your ACT or SAT score is like smack in the middle, if it's in the average, it's probably going to be in the target range for you, okay? If your score is going to be at the upper bound, like 75th percentile and above, it's looking closer like target/foundation. If you're going to be, in the middle and then closer to the lower bound, especially for the top schools, it'd be probably more of the reaches. And so, Michael, with that, let's talk about reach schools.
Yeah, the interesting thing I want to start off with on the reach schools is a lot of students like to think that if they use their early decision application to their advantage, that their reach school gets easier to get into. And I think it's important to say that's a misconception. Your chances to get into a challenging, what would be a reach school, are still going to be challenging if you apply ED. Do you have a little bit of an edge? Maybe. But in terms of a school moving from target to reach from reach to target because you went ED, or becoming easier to get into as a reach school, I'm not sure I would buy into that. Okay, so that's one piece I would say in particular. I think there has to be a reason why you have a particular reach school. Is there something you've done? Have you done some really cool research that a college is going to look at? I mean, lots of times I like to ask a student, why do you think Stanford would consider you? And I like to make the student reflect on that and think about, well, I'm really good at this and I'm really good at that. And I want to hear something that they're really passionate about, because I think a reach school is going to look for someone very, very special in terms of who's applying. And you need to make sure, as we talked last time about the application, that the story that you tell in your application and the support you get from your school ties into that as well too, to really help you have a chance at some of these reach schools.
And that's exactly sort of the point of this language I have here. Be bold but smart. Take calculated risks based on mutual demonstrated fit, right? Whatever the cool things whatever the cool thing is that you might be referring to for the student thinking about Stanford, why is that going to matter to them? What is it that they're doing that both you and Stanford are simpatico, are mission aligned in your respective purposes on this planet, that they have to bring you in because you're going to facilitate their mission and their vision for the world and vice versa.
Yep. And in many ways, being a good person. Colleges really look at community service. They really look at what you've done to support your community and family many times.